Well, thank you. Thanks so much. It's great. Okay, so the last talk was amazing, and I have to say, over Christmas, I learned how to knit. I'm not crafty at all, but it was really fun, and I've been telling my kids that it's the original 3D printing, and that kind of helped them understand it. So, okay, so I'm going to talk about Marie Curie and some parallels that I found between her story and open source, which I work in a lot, Kickstarter, and women in tech. So I'm from Austin, Texas. I'm so happy to be here in London with you guys. I work for Cisco DevNet. DevNet's the developer program for Cisco across all of our technologies, IoT, collab, networking, all of that. And I get to work with an amazing group of developer advocates, and it's so much fun. Okay, but on to Marie Curie. So Marie Curie was definitely a childhood hero of mine. You know, always had a poster on my wall, wrote a report in the 3rd grade about her and thought she was amazing. And recently, about a year ago, my dad gave me this book for a Christmas present. He always gives me interesting books. And I was really excited, and I thought, okay, I'll read this book. And kind of what I expected to see was, you know, a nice read about my hero. I like intellectual property law, and so I thought, ooh, this is an interesting angle on her story. That'll be kind of cool. But what I found that I did not expect were all these parallels between the treatment of her work in the early 1900s and things that I see in today's tech industry. And so that's what I want to share with you are these parallels and how it gets you thinking about some different things. But first, it's been a while for some of us since we studied Marie Curie, so I just want to do a really quick refresher on her work. This is a quote that I love, and I've had this with me for, in my life for a while. So, life is not easy for any of us, but what of that? We must have perseverance and, above all, confidence in ourselves. We must believe that we are gifted for something and that this thing must be attained. If that's not sustaining craft, I don't know what is, right? Persevering through it and finding your craft. So I think it kind of fits, James. Okay, so what did Marie Curie do? She coined the term radioactive. She was part of the most famous husband and wife team in science. She discovered 2 new elements, radium and polonium. She was the first female professor ever at the Sorbonne. She was the first woman to be awarded a Nobel Prize. And she's the only woman still to have won the Nobel Prize in 2 disciplines. So it's, definitely historical, but still pretty amazing today. Still holds up on some amazing work. This was the periodic table of the elements around 1898, and you can tell that there's all these elements missing, right? They knew that, because looking at the atomic numbers, they knew these elements had to exist, but no one had discovered them yet. They couldn't actually isolate or prove that they exist. This is the periodic table we have today, right? And these are the 2 elements, radium and polonium, that Marie Curie discovered and proved the existence of. And to me, when I was a little girl, I had the periodic chart on my wall. I was definitely like a chemistry geek. And it was so huge to me that this hero that I kind of related to, since she was also my same gender, that she did something this tangible, that was like these 2 things on this chart were unknown until she found them. And that was very real and graspable to me, and I think that's why it stuck with me. And she later, as I started my career and started my work, I started reading about her life and her family. And she says, I've frequently been questioned by women how I could reconcile family life with a scientific career. Well, it has not been easy. I think that's the understatement of the year for her. So, this is a quick timeline, and what's amazing to me is how fast things happened in her career. She begins her studies, she gets her master's degree, she marries Pierre Curie, her partner and husband. Right after that, they discover polonium and radium and have their first child, very quickly. Irene is born. Then, within a few years, she earned her doctorate and the Nobel Prize the same year. Isn't that incredible? And they also successfully isolate radium. And then, very sadly, tragedy, Pierre dies, and now Marie is on her own, right after having their second daughter. She goes on from there to found the Radium Institute, which is still around today and doing great work, and winning the Nobel Prize for Chemistry. And so you can look at this and how all of this incredible scientific work was going on in the midst of having her 2 kids getting married and becoming a widow, which is pretty incredible. Okay, so now I want to talk about the open source parallel. And this is open sourcing radium, and this centers around a publish or patent dilemma. So discovering radium, the Curies became very interested in radiation. And they found that there was a ore called pitchblende that they were studying. And the radiation coming from it was so much stronger than what they could account for with just the uranium they knew was in that sample. So they suspected that there had to be another highly radioactive element that was yet unknown, right? One of those blanks on the periodic charts. But in 1898, they discovered 2 new elements, polonium and radium. But they don't exist by themselves in nature freely. And so they had to create an isolated sample to prove the existence of this element. Otherwise, they couldn't really prove that it was an element. So Marie spent years refining a process to separate out and get 1/10 of a gram of pure radium chloride. And this was really secret sauce, right? This was the process for refining the pitchblende to isolate the radium. So now they had something. They had new knowledge. What do? Do you publish or do you patent it? And so the discovery of a new element, that's pure science. That's something you publish that goes back to the works of everyone. But the process to refine a new element, that's more invention. There were lots of processes for refining things that had been patented. And so the Curies had a big discussion around this because in the 1900s in France, married women did not have the right to own any property. And that extended to intellectual property. So that meant that if they went down the patent path, Marie, who was the actual main contributor to that process of isolating the radium, could not hold the patent for it. So, and this was because of a very famous law at that time, which had been around for quite a while, that judged married women incapable, and it prevented them from managing their own affairs or signing contracts. So extremely limiting, right? So what do? Do you publish or patent? Who's been involved in a patent process in here? Probably lots of people, right? Can you imagine having your team and having someone on your team that was a major contributor and say, we're going to get a patent, but you can't be on it because you're not the right gender or whatever reason? Do you think that seems like fair or popular or a path you would go down? I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing to even think about having that conversation. So they had a real dilemma. There was a lot of money on the table for them potentially. There was certainly a lot of just ownership. They had to figure out what to do. And the solution they came up with to me was like, voila, open source. So what they did was they published the knowledge and the details of the refining process. Here's how to do it. We're going to put this into the scientific work. But Pierre patented a set of tools and measuring devices that helped you do that process. So they sold tooling or enterprise services to help with your open source, right? And they provided consulting services on how to do the process. And this is what really established the groundwork for the Radium Institute. So to me, this seems very, like I said, very familiar, that it's you open source, you can have hosted subscriptions, you can do enterprise tools, and hopefully have this thriving community, which was kind of like the Radium Institute. So it was a very modern solution in terms of what we think of the tech industry to a problem they faced in the 1900s. The other part of this that was really interesting is that by going the public contribution route, it gave Marie a way to show her contributions in a very concrete way. Similar to how if you are a junior dev starting out, maybe from an underrepresented group, Code Commits to Open Source can do the same for you. You can relentlessly build and track your public record of work. And so that's another thing that became very important. And these are her notebooks. These are, they are digitizing them and you can see them online, but they have to be hidden because they're still radioactive. They absorb so much radioactivity that no one can be around them because they're still emitting so much radioactivity. So it's very interesting. But the notebooks are fascinating, and it was a relentless tracking of the work that was done. And it's written in her hand, so it's like, her commit. So the way that they started to publish this was they wrote these notes to the Academy of Science. And it's very interesting to track how these notes worked. In the first note, Marie Curie is the only author. She's done it by herself, and she used her full name with her Polish maiden name as well. In the second note, which was a bigger scientific discovery, she follows her husband, and she's removed her Polish name. She's just Madame S. Curie. And in the final note, which was really the big discovery note, she's the second author between two men, and her name is gone. Now she's just Madame P. Curie. And this is really interesting to think about this, because Pierre's identity remained stable throughout this whole process, but Marie's is very fluid, and it's kind of fuzzy. And it was that the more significant contribution they were writing about, the more important it was to assign that discovery to someone who was a person under the law. So they even faced that when they were publishing it. It was interesting to see. Okay, so that was kind of the open sourcing part. Now for the parallel that's kind of around diversity and inclusion. And this is really, this one has some really interesting and unknown parts, or at least parts that were unknown to me. So in 1904, the Curies were like celebrity couple. They were on the cover of Vanity Fair. Their imagination was captured with this modern scientific couple that was doing this work. And then in 1906, this tragedy happened where Pierre was struck by a carriage and killed. And so this literally threw all of their plans into disruption, right? The college, the Sorbonne, they didn't know what to do because they had this important work going on. They wanted it to continue. And they wanted it to continue so much that they nominated Marie to take Pierre's position as a professor at the Sorbonne, and she became the first female professor that they had ever had. And this was controversial. And the other thing that happened is that now as a widow, Marie can own property. She is a person under the law. So things have changed in terms of what her legal rights are. This was good and bad. She came out of the shadows. People who maybe wanted to pretend like Pierre was doing all the work and sort of the lead author on it can't really pretend that anymore because he's not in the picture. She can sign contracts, she can own property, she can be a professor, she's managing the laboratory. Harder to ignore what's going on, and therefore maybe a little more irritating to some of the establishment. There was a rising tide sort of traditionalism in France at that time, and Marie was definitely seen as very representing the modern. She was Polish, she was a mother of a young daughter, she just had her thesis, and she was this first woman at the Sorbonne. So two kind of competing thoughts going on. And then a seat on the very, very prestigious Academy of Sciences opens up. And this is where like all of the amazing scientific decisions were made and things were debated in France at this time, and really kind of for the world to some extent. Pierre had won a seat in 1905, but in 1910, a seat opened up, and Marie was a candidate. She got nominated as a candidate, and everyone thought it seemed like a shoo-in, which I'd never seen the word shoo-in written before, but it was in the book, and I wanted to put it on a slide. So I thought that was funny. So she seemed like a shoo-in. But wait, she would be the first ever female candidate. And so this opened up some interesting aspects. She adamantly stressed through the whole process of the nomination that this was never in the news, these announcements, these candidates. It was just within the scientific community. It wasn't a big deal, and that she would find it embarrassing if this custom was altered because of her. This did not work. She was like tracked by photographers. The paparazzi were after her. This is a picture of her. Can't see it very well, but she's hiding behind her purse with people taking pictures because so much limelight was put onto her. And she kept saying, in science, we must be interested in things, not persons, trying to take the limelight away. But this grew into this furious debate because it really was more about her than just her. It was this choice between two worlds. It became pitched in the media as traditionalism versus modernism, and that they had backings from two different groups of academics, and that a vote for Curie was a vote for turmoil and against tradition, and it became this whole way of talking about it. And so they said no. They voted against her. They voted for Branly, who was someone that was up for it actually his third time. He had done some great stuff in wireless, in wireless technologies, but I think there was definitely equal scientific merit there. So they said no. They went with the traditional candidate. Would anyone like to guess how long until the first female was appointed to the Academy after Marie? Yeah, 68 years, 1979. Isn't that incredible? That blew me away. And then things got even weirder. So then she thought, okay, that's over with, things will pass, But there was so much controversy. There were love letters that were stolen, there was an alleged affair, and then people started fighting duels over her honor. And there were 5 duels fought during this one time period over her honor. And this is an actual footage of one of those duels that you can find on YouTube. It's incredible. Some of them were with swords, some of them were with pistols. And during this time, during this controversy, is when she was awarded her second Nobel Prize, which goes to her alone, not her and Pierre. And so you can imagine all of that coming together. They actually kind of asked her maybe to not come to the dinner for the Nobel Prize, but she said, no, I'm coming anyway. I don't care about what's going on. She just forged ahead. So you can think about all the parallels there. I'm going to move to the next one. So the next one is what I call Marie's Kickstarter campaign. And this is around crowdsourcing radium. So this is radium. At the time when Marie was working, it was the most valuable material on Earth. Can you guess how much 1 gram cost? So in 1921, 1 gram cost $100,000 in 1921. It was the most valuable material on Earth because there was so many people wanting to do research on it, and it was so hard to refine and isolate. So during this time, Marie met a New York socialite who was an editor of a magazine and a promoter of different things. And this woman from New York became very fascinated with Marie and got to know her very well. And she talked to her and she asked her, is your laboratory doing all this work on radium, and how much do you have? And Marie said, I don't have any radium. She's like, my laboratory through the school has some, but it's all for other purposes. I don't have any radium for my own research to do anything. And the socialite from New York was blown away by this. She couldn't believe that the discoverer of radium had no radium of her own. So she started a subscription fund to buy Marie Curie a gram of radium. And she did this in the US. And so it became this thing of women around the US giving back to Marie because they kind of felt she was a hero and were grateful for her work, that they were going to buy her own gram of radium for her to do work with. And the way, at first, the New York socialite was just going to go get a couple of her wealthy friends and get them to give larger chunks of money and buy the gram of radium and move on. But it turned out that all these people wanted to contribute. So they opened it up. They had it at all these different banks. Anyone could walk in and say, I'm giving $3 to the Marie Curie Radium Fund. And people started holding bake sales and doing local fundraisers. And it was this really emotional charge that anyone could, of whatever amount they wanted to give, go participate in this. And they ended up raising 3 times the amount that Einstein received for the Nobel Prize that year. So through this Kickstarter campaign, they had more than enough for a gram of radium, and they actually had some that they gave her as a fund to help fund research as well. And this was incredible. Marie was blown away. She came to the U.S. to accept it, and it was really interesting. And I think when you read about it, it was a very powerful moment for her. Okay, so why talk about all this history? That was a lot of history. Hopefully you thought some of it was interesting and relevant to you. But I think, as I read it and you look at things that are going on today, to me it's helpful to kind of do an exercise of taking something from the past or something from now, and sort of switching the names with historical names and seeing if it seems ridiculous. Like when we hear the thing about the Academy of Sciences and they said no, and then it was 68 years till someone was appointed. We have things like that happen today, and can we spot them with the knowledge of that history with us? And so I think that's really important. And as we talk about sustaining craft, I think that Marie's perseverance through all of these things that blocked her way is really an example of that. And so it's very powerful to me. And the other reason I think is because of the power of heroes. Did you guys see Wonder Woman? It's been a while now. But so I went and I took my niece, and I thought, I didn't really think that much about it. I was kind of really busy when it came out, and I was like, yeah, I want to see it. Okay, let's go see it. And then I was watching it, and it really hit me really hard, and I was almost tearing up, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And my little niece was sitting beside me, and she's 5, and she kept going, I cannot believe this. I cannot believe this. And so that was extremely powerful. And so then I told my husband, I was talking to him, I was like, wow, this really hit me so much harder than I thought it would, And he was like, well, don't you remember your name tag? And I was like, my name tag. And then I was like, oh yeah, my name tag. When I was little, I liked to play with label makers. I grew up in a small town, not a lot to do. So this was a name tag I made for myself with a label maker. Who can remember the kind that you turn the thing and push it? Yeah. And so I had forgotten about this name tag where I am Wonder Woman, Mandy White, and Queen of Hawaii, which I had been to Hawaii and liked it, and I thought it must have been a good place to be queen of, I guess. But anyway, I have it in this little frame because after I had my first kid, and I was kind of trying to sort out being a mom and going back to work, and I just couldn't hold those both in my head very well, and I was having a lot of conflict around it. And my mom, who was really great at finding things, found this name tag and mailed it to me and said, look at all the things you thought you could be when you were 5 at the same time. She's like, I think you can figure this out. And so, yeah, so that's my name tag story. But the power of heroes. So when I think back to myself, high school, college, trying to think about what I wanted to do, what I wanted to pursue as a career, there were all these things I was interested in. I was really interested in math, and I read all these books by Nash and Turing and all these things. I really liked archaeology, I loved reading about Jack Horner and Indiana Jones, of course, right? I also knew about computers. So Clifford Stoll, I loved the Cuckoo's Egg book. I don't know if anyone's read that. It's pretty old now, but it's amazing. It's like one of the first real hacker stories that's really fascinating. And I knew about Grace Hopper because my grandmother was in the Navy, and she told me about Grace Hopper all the time. So that was very inspiring. And then I knew about Marie Curie as a chemist, who was definitely one of my childhood heroes. And so when I got to the point to making a decision about what I ended up doing computers and chemistry. So I have a chemical engineering degree and a master's in computer engineering. And the reason I said that, it's hard to parse out now, right, later, but what I said was those seemed more realistic. And maybe they seemed more realistic because I had an example that I could relate to a little bit more. So I think that there is something in this power of heroes to think about. And that's it. I recommend you read this book. It's amazing. There's more in it than I would be able to fit into a talk. And the writer is wonderful and does a great job of laying it out. So I really recommend it. And I thank you for being here. You can find me, and I'd love to discuss any of this with you if you have thoughts or ideas. Thanks so much.